Welcome to the Gold Newsletter Podcast, your bank of knowledge of investments, economics, and geopolitics. Go to goldnewsletter.com for our publications and archives to increase your wealth monetarily and educationally.
This is Fergus Hodgson with the Gold Newsletter Podcast. Thank you for being with us. We're going to explore private governance today, which is something that I've been eager to see come to fruition for such a long time. And I have my friend Sven Schütt. He is originally from Germany. He's a visiting scholar with the American Institute for Economic Research and a recent master's graduate in philosophy, politics, and economics from the Severo Institute in Prague. He specializes in Austrian economics and behavioral policy making. And his thesis, which I have in front of me, is on special economic zones. Sven, welcome to the Gold Newsletter Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here. And I'm proud to be here today.
No, mate, I'm glad. We got to meet back in Massachusetts, and I know you're continuing your work on this, and I'm excited to see more people learn about your research on this because we really do live in a wonderful era. Every day I feel glad to live in this time in history because it's such a point of rapid change, and in my view, rapid change for the better. Whether we're approaching private governance, I don't know. You're going to inform us on this. Why don't you tell us what private governance is and is not?
Quickly, just a sentence. Every of our professors always tells us we have never lived in a better time than today. I totally agree on this.
Sure.
Actually, it never had been better, and it only will be better, hopefully. A big part of this is actually private governance. And most people don't even realize it or haven't even thought about it because it's so much in our everyday life. So if most people think about private governance, they are immediately scared about like this stateless nation or someone who loves anarchy. And
well, stateless nation seems almost like an oxymoron, but yeah, okay, so they get confused. Yeah, sure.
But it's always like this extreme where people are afraid of and see it then just black and white and tell you, oh, we need this government to be for us here and protect us. But private governance is in our everyday life. For example, PayPal or Visa are private governance examples. I will go later in detail why and how.
Sure.
But even more recent nowadays, what we all see and use is like Uber and Airbnb. And there's a great book came out actually only a month ago, I guess. It's from Mike Munger, and it's about Tomorrow 3.0 and talks about the sharing economy.
No, what was that book there? Tomorrow 3.0 by Mike Munger?
Yes, it's about the sharing economy, so which means he looks especially on all the new things coming up in the last years and all the apps we basically have on our phones. Like, for example, Uber, where like private people share their cars with us and giving us a ride. And they don't have their taxi as we know it back in the days, like this yellow car usually, or Uber or Airbnb, where people rent out their couch or their second room in the flat instead of we going to a hotel. And all these economies are basically completely new because it's privately owned property, which was not used before in the same sense. So there's not something new created. It's just that we share what we have better and more efficient based on technology nowadays. In these circumstances, the government is not prepared for this. So the state has no rules about this, and the government doesn't know what to do with it. Therefore, these companies always had to come up with their own solution for this problem. Like, if you would ask me 10 years ago, would you jump in a stranger car right down the road in a city I've never been before, and then afterwards give him like a 5-star or tip him even? No one would do this. No one would jump in a stranger's car. But how is it that we nowadays like totally trust in a country we have never been, in a city we have never been, trust the app on the phone that we jump in a car, get from A to B, and know we are safe, and know he will be even quicker and mostly even cheaper than a taxi? How is this change possible?
Well, not only do we trust those drivers, we trust them far more than regular taxi drivers, in my experience. I mean, I know maybe my example is an awkward one because I'm in Guatemala, but I always tell people to go through Uber rather than to pick up the local drivers.
Yes, definitely. Especially in countries where you know there is like a suspicious cartel going on taxi drivers. And even, some countries where people recommend you to not use a taxi because it's more likely to get robbed in a taxi than actually not using the taxi. So Uber is overcoming this.
But let's just try and clarify there. You're basically saying the first misconception is that people imagine private governance to look like, I guess, orthodox or conventional governance, and you're saying that that's a misunderstanding. So what is this term governance? Because our natural or knee-jerk reaction is to assume the police and imposition and mandates, and why is that not the case?
In terms of private governance and not government, it's just that the private governance is a set of rules we agree before we act. And these rules are just the rules of the game, as we call them. It's kind of the same with government, where you have the law and you have to obey the law. You have to be nice because otherwise someone comes and put you in jail. But in private governance, it's more like this contract with another private person that you agree on the rule of the game. Otherwise, you will not have for both beneficial trades. And in case of Uber, it's just that we use the third-party Uber itself, which says, okay, here are the rules of the game. Driver, you are not allowed to rob your own customer, or you are not allowed to charge him too much, or like driving him around where he doesn't want to go. You who wants to order the Uber, you have also played by the rules. You have to give us your Visa credit card details before, so the driver is sure he gets paid. And we take care that the driver knows he gets paid, and we take care that you get from A to B in the certain amount of time safe. And by agreeing to these rules, to this beneficial trade for both, we have this private governance, which is executed by Uber. So we don't have a law protecting us. There is no Uber law, or there is no government, or there is also not a policeman we can call if the Uber driver charged us too much. For example, if I would use an Uber in New York City and he would charge me way too much money, I couldn't call the police and say like, oh, he frauded me. The police would say, yeah, sorry, not our problem. And I could not even go to court. Or maybe I could, but it would take way too long. What I do is I just give him 0 stars on Uber. Right, Uber, this guy should not be in business. And Uber will look at it and take care of it. And there the market will solve its own problem without even the government involved. Same example, what Edward Stringham is using in his book, Private Governance, is eBay. So if you buy on eBay, you always buy from a private person. It's usually not a business. And when you buy from the private person and you don't go get the product you wanted, you don't complain to the police. You complain to eBay. And eBay is solving then the problem for you without even the law involved. And this is like the perfect example of private governance.
Sure. One thing that strikes me with these examples is that none of them are geographical in nature. I mean, driving from point A to B is, but what I mean is that these forms of governance, as you say, they are in the digital world, right? They're not confined to particular borders. How does this translate over to the maybe more physical world that we're accustomed to? Or is it? I get confused when we mix the two. Are these competitors to conventional territorial governments or nations?
Yes, they are. There are also private governance examples which are also territorial. One of the biggest is homeowner associations. So it's just this property bought from the businessman in the beginning and resold to other people who want to live in the homeowner association, and they have to agree on the rules of the homeowner association. So if I want to live in a part of a city which is privately owned and not like by the state, or like, let's say the city sells property to you, there is like this homeowner association who holds the property and is just giving it to you under certain circumstances. And usually it means that you have to have even more rules than just the normal city rules. So you agree on even more private rules. So why is it that people agree on even more rules and prefer to live in a homeowner association instead of just buying a house somewhere else? And it's usually because in this private, very small community, people know what is their needs and what they don't want. So in a homeowner association, usually you will see the streets are cleaner, they are in better conditions. They may have even a guard or not, so that they don't even have to worry about who runs around in the neighborhood. They agree that the garden has to look nice, so that everyone knows his neighborhood looks good, and also the value of his property is not going down by rundown properties next door. So people are willing to agree on these private solutions to make sure that they really have what they want. And even in a bigger term, where I started to do my research now, is special economic zones. It means there is a special zone, it's a territory, but in this territory, within the nation state, are different rules and different regulations, different tariffs. It can be everything. It's a very broad term, but the most famous example for even having a different sort of government is Hong Kong, where Hong Kong is a part of China, but doesn't has the same law and rules as mainland China. So the people in Hong Kong have a lot of benefits. It's ranked in the Economic Freedom Index, always in the top 5. It's a great doing country because their people agreed on different set of rules because they figure out on their own that these rules are better than what the state is providing. And special economic zones in the private term, what I'm doing my research on, is the question, how could we have better rules in a zone, and how do we ensure that these rules are really better and really enforceable and don't get destroyed by the government later?
For more than 40 years, top financial experts and private investors from all over the world have gathered for the New Orleans Investment Conference to discover new opportunities and strategies, exchange ideas, and plan for the coming year. To learn more about today's investing environment and updates, join Mark Skousen, Peter Schiff, Brian London, Robert Kiyosaki, Doug Casey, and dozens of other experts at this year's event from the 1st to the 4th of November. Go to NewOrleansConference.com to register today.
Yeah, well, in your thesis, which I hope we can get published one of these days, you contend that, quote, special economic zones, if carefully created, bring positive effects which outweigh the negative effects for the local economy. Obviously, this is going to be a battle fought out over the next century between conventional governments and the disruptors, the creative destroyers of the status quo, which I love. But many people are just wedded to the old way or the status quo. How do you make the claim to them that we should embrace what is coming?
That's actually a good question, because I face this question always when I talk to people about my project. Because everyone is telling me, but we have already a good set of rules.
Do we? Who are the we in this instance?
So this, for example, is like when I talk a lot in Germany with friends or in the United States with friends. They are always like, okay, we are an industrial country. We are way ahead of the rest of the world. We have a good law system. We have a good school system. And they point out a lot of things. And I'm like, yeah, it's better compared like to maybe Sudan, or
Sure.
It's better compared to Congo. But is it really the best we could have nowadays? Because then you can look on a lot of examples where you see it's working even better in other countries. So why don't we adopt to the better? And there's like a big misconception and a big problem which society has not understood so far. And this is basically the knowledge problem and the incentive problem. So we can basically break it down to these two big things. There are a lot of other factors going into it, but people don't understand that the government can't even have the knowledge what people really want and need at a certain amount of time or in which time. Because as Hayek said back in the days, there is no one or no central figure who can acquire enough knowledge to know all needs of everyone. And this is the basic problem. And the other problem of the incentive, if you ask people, do they trust their party? Usually they say yes. And do they think the government will work in their favor? They also usually say yes. But if you ask them about a specific person, like, will Donald Trump make my life better? They usually say no. And how does it come that they trust a government institution? How does it come they trust like a big thing? But if you break it down to small people, they disagree with you. And they understand that every person has his own incentive. And as a politician, his incentive is to get reelected, because otherwise he's not employed anymore. And his incentive is like to make his own benefit bigger, not the benefit of society. But if they look at the party, they always think the party acts in their interest. And this is a big problem. And private governments overcomes this problem by having the private people who really want the solution and find a solution for it and create then a system which they can use. This is why we usually see it always first in trade. like, for example, financial markets. They usually come up with new ideas and new things where government, if they want to regulate it, they have to do it in such a slow way that it comes in effect like 5 years later or even longer.
The point about the fact that, well, we already have a good government or system of law or whatever smacks me as such a defeatist attitude that it reminds me of the essay by Francis Fukuyama. He's a smart guy. I don't want to take anything away from him, but he wrote a very influential essay, The End of History, and then a book, The End of History and the Last Man. And he basically claimed that the liberal or social democratic republic, I guess the final destination, it was the best form of governance that man had found, or would find perhaps. And that just seems crazy to me, that humans just at this point just know the best of everything. Of course there must be better ways to do things, and we still have to keep pushing for those. So I hear you. One of my problems, and this has been coming to me, I've been thinking about this a lot. I'm reading right now The Social Singularity, a decentralist manifesto by Max Borders, which I'll review probably in the next week or so. And I mean, it's very compelling. It's saying that technology is advancing at a rapid clip, and there's so many different and better ways to do things, and we should have competitive governance because, yeah, as you said, the incentives are wrong, and that centralized governance cannot know your needs like decentralized governance can, or it cannot be responsive. But there's a big but to this, and this one pains me to say, and I'll let you wrestle with it. The but is that so many people live off the largesse of governance or government. And it reminds me of the saying from Frederick Bastiat, that government is the great fiction by which everyone seeks to live at the expense of everyone else. And that's the hard bit for me to see. People weaning themselves off dependence on the state. I guess another way to reframe the question is that people won't believe things that they think are against their economic interests. If they have an interest in continuing to receive largesse, why would they want to believe in something that does away with that?
I totally agree there. And my first economic teacher I ever had in the university, Ken Schooland on Hawaii.
Yes, a great man.
Great man. I love this guy. And he always had this great quote. He was always, give a man a fish and he will be satisfied for one day. But give him the fish of someone else person and he will always vote for you. And I love this quote because it really shows the problem of nowadays society.
Yeah.
It's not that people want to solve their own problems. It's more or less that they want to have someone who is delivering already the end product. Best example nowadays, we have in Germany right now one of the worst droughts ever.
Okay.
And most of my friends who are farmers, they have losses over 70-80% of their harvest.
Okay.
So they can't finance throughout the next period, or they struggle a lot. And everyone I'm talking to is like, yeah, the government has to help. And I always ask, why? Why should the government help you? Like, why should the government bring now subsidies out to help you go into your next period? It wasn't the government's fault that there is a drought. It wasn't like even your fault, no one's fault. But why should the government bail you out? And they are always, because we are so important for society. We create the food on the shelf, on the table. Therefore, we have to have this help. But if I ask them, okay, there's a company in our town, if it burns down, and they ask the government to rebuild the company, would you like it? And everyone is like, no, why would the government rebuild the company? It's like, it was their fault, it burned down, they could have had insurance. They could have prevented this fire. It's their business problem. It's not my problem. And they don't get the connection. So there are things where we think the government has to do it and has to deliver it, even if we know it's not the case. It's the same for school systems.
No, I agree. But we understand the situation that people have an entitlement mentality. They're accustomed to handouts. And these are counterproductive, right, to the long-term prosperity because they create perverse incentives, they misallocate resources, and they punish people who might be more creative and who will leave the economy and go to other more vibrant places. How are you going to turn this around? Or how will this turn around at all? I mean, that's the barrier I see, this dependence, whether it's a psychological dependence or economic dependence, whatever it is. there's that problem we face, and maybe it is coming down. Maybe people are, by creative destruction, are losing that dependence. I'm not sure. But I guess there are two sides. There's the technological or economic side, and then there's the ideological challenge. How do you approach this?
First of all, I'm an optimist and have really faith in humanity.
Great.
So therefore, the answer for me personally seems to be easy. And well, I think it just takes time, honestly, because if we see these changes, like my young generation right now, for us, Uber is like the most normal thing ever. Like if I traveled around the last years, and I came back to Germany, and I took my phone and wanted to go from the airport home with Uber, and then I realized that Uber is banned in Germany, and I was
crazy.
Like, why is it banned?
I was in your country recently, and it's the same problem in many places in Europe. Yeah.
Oh yes, but you see, this will go away, and you see it will deregulate more and more because people realize the benefits they can have. Without having, Uber is just a small example, but without getting the access to all these beautiful things out there, not only the economy suffers, but also like every individual suffers. And yes, people always try to stick what they have already, and they are not used to new and don't like new things in the first place. But I think this problem can be overcome and will be overcome just by going forward, having still this innovation going, keep innovation alive, and then it will slowly make its way into society. Like there are a lot of examples where I can say, oh, this is what I benefit from nowadays, which my parents never had. And also when I always have this conversation with other people, like, oh, back in the days, everything was better. And you're like, okay, what was better? And then you go more in detail and you figure out, maybe it wasn't better. It just felt better.
Well, we look at the past with rose-tinted glasses, right? We reminisce the past with nostalgia, but in fact, we wouldn't have gotten to the future if people didn't make choices to change and adapt to better alternatives.
Yes, and I think there will be no radical change in the terms that the government will now say, okay, now is the area of private governance. We go away. Let's have fun. So I don't think it will be this way. But I think even more people, like all these entrepreneurs who are out there, they change it over time. And we have a really, really lively society right now in terms of entrepreneurs. It just started in the IT terms with Silicon Valley, which was a big boom. But now we see like every major city by now has its own startup scene. And everywhere are coming up so many new companies. Easier to get an own company nowadays than it was back in the days. Leading countries like Singapore and Hong Kong, where it does not even take 3 full business days to open your own business. And this goes on. And other countries try to adopt to this. Like, especially New Zealand, as you said in the beginning. New Zealand had so many reforms in the last years to go the right way. And yeah, it will just take time, but we will not have the businessman who will save us all, and we will not have the government who will save us all. It's just all the small individuals who see the beneficials of these trades who adopt to this.
Sure. Well, Sven, we mentioned we discussed 3 books during the last half hour. Tomorrow 3.0 by Mike Munger, The Social Singularity by Max Borders, and Private Governance by Edward Stringham. Is there any other reading you recommend? Or, I mean, you're working with AIER now, but is there any other center? I think there is one actually in the Czech Republic that is really researching the next generation of governance. What should people follow? Severo Institute? What other organizations are on the cusp here?
The organization which I would recommend everyone to follow, it's brand new and it's not long there. It's run by Mark Luther. And it's a Center of Innovative Governance Research.
Sure.
It's based in Washington.
Yes, I know.
And the other one is, he's a great guy. And the other one is Institute for Competitive Governance. Also brand new. Have an eye on this one. These 2 institutions try really to bring business with economics together and let them share their ideas. Like, what does people need and why do they think they need it? And then that economists help them with some background so they understand how they can go their way. And I really like the link because it's not just us economists live in our own world and we know everything better. And actually, we don't change anything in the world. which I really don't like, sitting around just economists, and everyone claims he knows it, but he's not going out and doing it. So Mark really does a great job there, going to the people and connect people. And in terms of books, which I highly recommend, is, for example, Your Next Government from Tom Bell from the last year, 2017. And also Lotta Moberg's book, The Political Economy of Special Economic Zone, 2017, where she really wants to show that just putting the sticker Special Economic Zone on something doesn't make it special or economic or a great zone. It just gives maybe cronyism the chance to get more influence. She is doing a great job in the beginning of showing the big problem nowadays. What we have is the false incentive of government compared with cronyism is a really big problem we face and we have to break down in the future. Because even if more people believe in a free market economy, or like even if more people believe in capitalism, they usually tend to fall in a trap of cronyism in the end. And this is even a bigger problem than government.
Tell me about it, man. Yeah, so it's just the way. I mean, for better and for worse, the vast majority of people are caught up in this web of government, either being employed by government or working as a crony of government or doing lobbying or political partying. It takes up an enormous portion of economic activity. The one other organization I just remembered is just social-evolution.com. This is the organization of Max Borders. So Sven, are you on Twitter? Where do people follow you?
Sadly, I'm not anywhere so far. I'm just on Facebook, following most of the other people.
We will put up your AIER archive so people can read your articles there.
Yes, and I would recommend follow AIER in general. It's a great institution.
Sure.
And it's really coming alive again.
Excellent, Sven. Thanks so much for your time, and we will be in touch.
Thank you for having me here.